Today we're going to be talking about creating flourishing relationships, wonderful, successful relationships in our lives. The major reason that it's so important to understand the characteristics of successful relationships can be demonstrated by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Obviously, at the lower levels, there are important needs for our flourishing, to have our physical and safety needs met. But as you move up to more of the psychological needs, when our needs for love and affection and belongingness are not met, we feel lonely and worthless. And obviously, when we think about a life worth living, that doesn't meet the definition. Attachment and love are going to be really the major components that we're going to talk about in the first part of this lecture. And the major reason for that is because both attachment or successful attachment or secure attachment and love are the building blocks of a flourishing relationship. You need to have secure attachment and love in a relationship before purposeful, effortful behaviors can really be effective. So let's talk about sort of attachment and attachment theory relatively quickly. So attachment theory starts with John Bowlby in the late 60s, who really first described attachment as sort of an all-or-nothing process that comes from sort of the adaptive and maladaptive parental behaviors between particularly the mother and the child. However, research since then has really shown that there are individual differences in our attachment. So what is attachment? It's a lasting psychological connection between two human beings. What I always find really interesting about attachment is it's a very deep, emotional, enduring bond that connects two people across time or space. And so it really doesn't matter how close you are physically or how long it has been since you've talked with a person. If you have a secure attachment, then you're going to have a deep emotional bond that can be experienced at any time when you're in the presence with that person. What is so important about attachment and these sort of attachment systems is that attachment theory really provides an amazing explanation for the types of relationships we have as adults based on the types of relationships we had with our parents when we were children. And so the parent-child relationship really explains sort of the subsequent development into other types of relationships later. Really, the foundation of much of this work was by Mary Ainsworth, who developed what she referred to as the sort of classical behavioral assessment of attachment, the strange situation. In this assessment, the child is exposed to these novel situations. You can watch a video online that really sort of shows this, where the mother comes in and is with the child for a certain amount of time. There's a stranger there for a certain amount of time. The mother leaves. The stranger leaves, and really what's essentially happening throughout this entire interaction is that coders are watching for the way that the child reacts, and they're really looking for particularly 4 types of behaviors that the child will exhibit when the mother returns back to the room. So how much closeness and contact seeking the child displays, how much they maintain contact, how much they try to avoid closeness or contact from the parent or from the mother, the resistance to comforting that might be displayed. If you were a coder, you would actually see a graph that looks an awful lot like this, and what would occur is that you would actually be watching the child behind a two-way mirror, and you would be looking to see if one of these types of behaviors was being displayed, and then you'd check off the intensity and the degree to which that behavior was being displayed within these interactions. And as a result of this sort of a coding system, you can then categorize children, infants, into an attachment style at their current level of development. So originally Ainsworth identified 3 major attachment systems. Really the one that you're most probably familiar with is secure attachment, and then there's sort of a host of different maladaptive types of attachment, insecure avoidant, insecure ambivalent, resistant types of attachment. So most importantly, a child is determined to be sort of in the secure attachment category if they display a balance between sort of exploration of their environment and contact with their caregiver. So they feel secure that they can go explore the environment. They also feel secure that their caregiver will be there and that they can come back to them. And we can compare that to, say, insecure, resistant, ambivalent, where the child will either passively or actively both demonstrate this hostility towards the mother or the caregiver while simultaneously wanting to be held and comforted. So you can see, obviously, these sort of mixed signals. Since then, there's been even Ainsworth herself, there's been more types of attachment categories. And again, what's really important is that these types of attachment systems that are developed, with our caregivers, really shape our relationships as adults. And of course, what's probably most important is that when you look at children, those who are determined to have secure attachment obviously have benefits in the moment. They have better coping skills when their parents are gone. They're better able to relate with a stranger. They end up taking charge, engage in learning activities, initiate new types of relationships. But we can also, particularly if we look at insecure attachment, we can see there's long-term consequences to insecure attachment. Those children who were determined to have insecure attachment later in life had relationship problems, they had emotional disorders, they had conduct problems, and so as a result of this, we can really see this line of thinking that the type of attachment that we have as a small child really has a major impact on the types of relationships we have later. And then we can see that as you start to look at attachment, you can even look at, and many of these researchers have done this, look at attachment just from the adult perspective. So they actually interview adults, and what they find is that adults who have essentially these types of behavioral examples, being sort of saying like well, love is easy, or sort of I'm not afraid to be alone, or not afraid to get close, that these types of comforts with others, or comforts in having others depend on them, is a classification system that you can actually see in adult attachment, right? So this is really a screenshot that sort of shows you a lot of the different ways that we see secure versus sort of avoidant types of attachment. So it's important here to sort of see that you can look at sort of the degree of anxiety and the degree of avoidance, and in many ways you want to be low on both, low on anxiety and low on avoidance to be secure. If you're high on both anxiety and avoidance, you can have sort of this fearful attachment, this sort of strange mixed feelings that I want to love you, but if you come too close, you might hurt me. And if you look at the sort of dismissive type of attachment, you're sort of low on anxiety but high in avoidance, this sort of desire to be really comforted, but at the same time wanting to be very, very independent, and determined as being very cold and aloof. And so what we see here is that adult attachment can really be easily measured, even if there wasn't any sort of classification system for children when they were young. I want to end here, this part of the lecture, and then really go into sort of love and purposeful behaviors in the second half. This is not part of the book, but I find it always really important to think about this when we're thinking about attachment now, because it can feel so fatalistic, right? So if you were insecurely attached as a child, you can sort of feel like, wow, I have no chance of really having good relationships because at the foundation I have to have secure attachment. So what can you do if you don't have secure attachment? There's a lot of advice on this. You can look this up. One of the most beneficial ways to have secure attachment is to actually develop a long-term relationship with someone who has a healthier attachment system than your own. That attachment can help you in sort of your sort of sense of attachment, and probably why so many people end up becoming sort of psychotherapists is because one of the major ways that you can help individuals develop long-term flourishing relationships is to get into psychotherapy. That's one of the major goals often of psychotherapy is to help individuals sort of develop secure attachment, even if that attachment wasn't established early in life. I'm going to go ahead and move to the slide here to just sort of show very quickly, and then we'll pick up here later, that again, attachment and love are necessary components for flourishing relationships, so the rest of this lecture will focus on love and purposeful behaviors.